Something just shifted in college football. And if you've been paying attention to what's happening at Colorado, you already feel it. This isn't just another transfer portal story. This is the moment a program decides to stop absorbing criticism and start defending its truth. Shedeur Sanders, a player known for staying silent when chaos erupts around him, made a deliberate, calculated decision to call out Jordan Seaton directly and publicly. And that decision, it tells you everything about what's really happening inside the Colorado program right now. The reason he did it, the timing of when he did it, and what Coach Prime said to his team immediately after, none of this is random. This is a story about character accountability, about what happens when players try to rewrite history on their way out the door, and about a program that's finally had enough. It's not gossip. It's not petty noise. It's a developing situation that reveals exactly what kind of culture exists at Colorado when the pressure is on. Let's get into what actually went down, why it matters, and what it says about the future of Coach Prime's program. Before we even focus on Jordan Seaton specifically, we need to understand the bigger picture that's been building throughout the entire 2024 college football season and into the offseason. Because this moment didn't happen in isolation. It's the result of a pattern that's become impossible to ignore. Multiple players have exited the Colorado program through the transfer portal over the past several months. And here's what makes this noteworthy: they haven't left quietly. That's not how this story goes. Instead, these players have gone directly into press conferences, media interviews, and social media spaces and made pointed, specific comments about Coach Prime, the program's facilities, the quality of coaching, the strength and conditioning program, and the overall environment at Colorado. This isn't one disgruntled player venting in private conversations. This isn't a guy who's frustrated and complaining to his family and friends behind closed doors. This is repeated, public behavior. This is players using their platforms strategically to critique the program they just left. The pattern became recognizable pretty quickly. Player transfers to a major program like Clemson or Tennessee. Player gets introduced to the media at their new school. Player sits down for interviews. And then, almost like clockwork, player uses that introductory platform to draw unfavorable comparisons back to Colorado. They'll talk about how elite Clemson's facilities are. They'll discuss Tennessee's coaching infrastructure in glowing terms, and the implicit message in every interview is crystal clear. Colorado's situation was holding me back. Colorado couldn't give me what I needed. I needed to escape to get better. London Merritt is a perfect example of how this played out. After he transferred to Clemson, he made comments that directly suggested Clemson's facilities and coaching infrastructure were superior to what he experienced at Colorado. He wasn't subtle about it. He was making a statement. Then there's the quarterback who transferred to Tennessee. He went into media appearances and made subtle but unmistakable digs at Colorado. Not explosive rants, just carefully chosen words in interviews that signaled his old program wasn't meeting his needs. What's interesting is that Colorado absorbed all of this without responding publicly for a long time. The program could have fired back immediately. Coach Prime could have gone on offense. But they didn't. There was a period of silence. The program let the criticism accumulate. They let the narrative build. They watched player after player go on camera and make claims about facilities and coaching. And for months, Colorado just took it. That silence ended when Jordan Seaton decided to sit down and make his specific claims about the program. And that's when everything changed. Now, let's be clear about who we're talking about. Jordan Seaton is an offensive lineman who was part of the Colorado program before he entered the transfer portal and committed to Clemson. This wasn't a reserve player or someone on the periphery. He was a significant part of the roster. He was getting development. He was being invested in. And then he left. In interviews following his transfer to Clemson, Seaton didn't hold back. He implied, with pretty direct language, that Colorado's facilities weren't at an elite level. He suggested that the strength and conditioning program wasn't where it needed to be. He made claims that his physical development hadn't been properly supported during his time with the Buffaloes. He positioned himself as a player who needed a higher level of infrastructure, a higher level of investment to reach his potential. And the clear implication running through every word was devastating. Colorado couldn't provide that. Colorado couldn't take me where I needed to go. When you hear a player at a major program like Clemson sit down and essentially say, "My old program didn't develop me properly," that's a serious critique. That's questioning not just the facilities, but the competence of the coaching staff. That's suggesting the program failed to do its job. That's the kind of statement that damages a program's reputation, especially when recruiting, because recruits are watching. Future players are hearing this. And if they believe Colorado can't develop them physically, why would they commit there? So Seaton's claims were significant. They were strategic. They were designed to make Colorado look inferior. And for a moment, in that media cycle, it seemed like the narrative was sticking. Here's another player saying the same thing other players had been saying. Here's more evidence that Colorado's infrastructure is the problem. But that's when Shedeur Sanders decided that someone needed to pump the brakes on this story. He decided that the record needed to be corrected. And he decided to do it publicly, directly, and with documentation. Because what happened next would reveal something the critics didn't want on the record. Jordan Seaton's own body was living proof that everything he was saying was false. To understand why Shedeur's eventual response was so powerful, we first need to look directly at what Jordan Seaton actually claimed when he sat down in front of cameras at Clemson. Because the specifics matter, the exact words matter, because they set up a contradiction that would become impossible to ignore. Seaton went on record with a very specific narrative about his experience at Colorado, and that narrative centered on one thing: the program's inability to properly develop him as a player. He didn't say, "I wanted a bigger platform." He didn't say, "I wanted to be closer to home." He didn't say, "I got a better financial offer." Those would all be honest, defensible reasons to transfer, but that's not what he said. Instead, Seaton positioned his transfer as a decision based on football development. He suggested, in interviews that are publicly available and directly quoted, that Colorado's facilities weren't elite level. Think about that phrasing. Not different. Not developing. Elite level. That's a specific claim. That's saying Colorado's infrastructure falls short of what elite programs have. He went further and talked about the strength and conditioning program specifically. He suggested that it wasn't where it needed to be to transform him into an NFL-caliber lineman. Again, this is a direct critique of Colorado's coaching and support staff. He's saying the people in charge of his physical development didn't know what they were doing or didn't have the resources to do it properly. He's questioning their competence. And then he made the personal claim. His physical development hadn't been properly supported during his time with the Buffaloes. He positioned himself as a player whose potential was being limited by Colorado's infrastructure. He was essentially saying, "I needed to leave Colorado because Colorado couldn't take me where I needed to go athletically." That's a serious statement. That's a statement that implies negligence on Colorado's part. The full picture Seaton painted was one of a program with outdated facilities, a strength and conditioning staff that wasn't equipped to handle elite-level development, and a coaching infrastructure that couldn't support a player's transformation into an NFL prospect. He positioned himself as someone who had outgrown Colorado, someone whose talent was too big for what Colorado could offer. And crucially, he positioned Clemson as the program that could actually develop him. By making those claims about Colorado, he was inherently suggesting that Clemson had what Colorado lacked. Clemson's facilities would be better. Clemson's coaching would be better. Clemson's infrastructure would support his development in ways Colorado's never could. Now, here's what's important to understand about this type of narrative in college football. When a player, especially a high-profile transfer, makes claims like this publicly, it echoes. It spreads. Recruiting analysts pick it up. Twitter picks it up. Recruits considering Colorado see it and think, "Wait, a player who was in that program is saying the facilities aren't elite? Maybe I should reconsider." That's the impact of what Seaton did. He didn't just make a statement. He influenced how other players and coaches would view Colorado. The claims were specific enough to be damaging, but vague enough to be hard to directly refute in the moment. How do you argue with, "The facilities aren't elite"? Do you go on camera and say, "Our facilities are too elite"? That sounds defensive. That sounds like you're missing the point. So in many ways, Seaton's approach was strategically smart from a PR perspective. He made serious allegations about Colorado's developmental capacity without being so specific that they could be immediately fact-checked. But here's where the story takes a turn, because Seaton made one critical mistake. He made these claims about a program that had actually, measurably, demonstrably developed him physically, not theoretically, not in ways that could be debated or interpreted differently, in ways that are documented, in ways that are visual, in ways that are undeniable. The transformation Seaton went through at Colorado was significant and visible. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you had to squint to see. It was the kind of physical change that gets noticed by scouts, by analysts, by anyone paying attention to how players develop in college. And that's exactly why, when Shedeur Sanders decided to respond, he didn't need to engage in a long, drawn-out argument. He didn't need to make personal attacks or get emotional. He just needed to point to the evidence. He just needed to show people what actually happened to Jordan Seaton's body while he was at Colorado. Because once that evidence was front and center, Seaton's claims about Colorado's developmental infrastructure didn't just look questionable. They looked false. But that evidence, that physical transformation, is where this story gets really interesting. Because it's not just about Seaton. It's about what it reveals about how development actually works, who deserves credit for it, and what it means when a player tries to take that credit and give it somewhere else. Here's where facts become impossible to ignore, and here's why Shedeur's eventual response was so devastating. Jordan Seaton's own body is the evidence that contradicts everything he claimed about Colorado's facilities and development infrastructure. When Seaton arrived at the University of Colorado, he weighed approximately 330 pounds. Let that number sit for a moment. 330 pounds. That was his starting point. That was what he brought to Colorado when he joined the program. Now, for an offensive lineman, size is important. But how you carry that size, how much of it is functional muscle versus body fat, how strong you are relative to your weight, that's what separates NFL prospects from college players who won't make the next level. Here's what happened next. Through the work done by Colorado's strength and conditioning staff during his time with the program, Jordan Seaton was transformed. He didn't just lose weight, he was systematically developed. He was transformed into a 305-pound lineman. That's a 25-pound reduction. But this wasn't just weight loss. This was athletic transformation. He came out leaner. He came out more powerful. He came out significantly more NFL-ready in terms of his physical profile. Think about what that means. A player came in at 330 pounds. The coaching staff at Colorado, the same staff Seaton later criticized for not having adequate strength and conditioning infrastructure, took him through a program that dropped him to 305 pounds while maintaining or increasing his functional strength. That's not simple. That's not something that happens by accident. That's the result of expert coaching, proper nutrition planning, carefully designed strength programs, and consistent execution. The transformation didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen at Seaton's house over the summer. It didn't happen because he independently figured out how to develop himself. It happened inside Colorado's facilities. It happened under Colorado's coaching staff. It happened using Colorado's resources. All three of those elements are essential. Facilities matter, coaching matters, resources matter, and all three came from Colorado. Here's what makes this part of the story crucial. There is documented photo and video evidence of this physical transformation that is publicly available and completely verifiable. This isn't speculation. This isn't interpretation. You can literally look at pictures of Seaton from his freshman year or early tenure at Colorado, and then look at pictures from later in his time there and see the physical difference. The transformation is visible. It's real. It's documented. It's verifiable. People following college football closely have seen these comparisons. Analysts have discussed them. It's not hidden information. It's not a secret. Anyone who wanted to fact-check Seaton's claims about Colorado's developmental infrastructure could simply look at photo evidence of what Colorado actually did to his body. So when Seaton sat in front of cameras at Clemson and suggested that the development infrastructure at Colorado was lacking, he was directly contradicting a physical reality that his own body represents. He was looking at documentary evidence of Colorado's work on his development and saying, in effect, this didn't happen, or this wasn't good enough. But his own body is proof that it did happen and that it was, by any reasonable standard, quite effective. You cannot credit your new program for a foundation that your old program built. That's not opinion. That's not interpretation. That's a factual, observable reality. If Seaton showed up at Clemson at 305 pounds, leaner and more powerful than when he arrived at Colorado, that's because Colorado made him that way. Clemson didn't do that. Colorado did. Now, Clemson can build on that foundation. Clemson can take what Colorado developed and push it further. That's how player development works. Players come into college programs at different levels, get developed, then transfer and get developed further. But you don't erase where the development started. You don't pretend the first program didn't lay the groundwork. What Seaton essentially did was take Colorado's work, take the physical foundation that Colorado's strength and conditioning staff built, take the infrastructure and resources that Colorado provided, and then turn around and suggest that Colorado's infrastructure was insufficient. He was saying, in effect, the foundation you gave me wasn't good enough, while his own body was proof that the foundation was substantial and effective. This is the contradiction that makes Seaton's narrative indefensible. Not because Seaton made a mistake, but because he made a false claim that could be directly contradicted by visual, documented, verifiable evidence. His body is the evidence. His 25-pound transformation is the evidence. The photos and videos are the evidence. And that's why when Shedeur Sanders decided to respond, he had something incredibly powerful to work with. He didn't need to make character attacks. He didn't need to question Seaton's intelligence or motivations. He just needed to point to what actually happened. He just needed to reference the documented evidence of Seaton's physical transformation and ask the simple question: how can you claim Colorado's development infrastructure failed you when Colorado's development infrastructure is literally written on your body? The facts, in this case, weren't just on Shedeur's side. The facts were undeniable. The facts were visible. The facts were documented. And those facts would make Shedeur's eventual response absolutely devastating to Seaton's narrative. To understand why Shedeur Sanders' decision to publicly call out Jordan Seaton resonated so widely, you need to understand who Shedeur is as a public figure. Because this response, this moment, represented something that almost never happens with him. It was a departure from his established pattern. Shedeur Sanders has spent his college career being one of the most composed, professional, and drama-free figures in the entire sport. That's not an exaggeration. That's a documented track record. He does not engage in social media arguments. He does not fire back at critics. He does not take shots at other programs or individual players. When chaos erupts around him, and plenty of chaos has erupted around Colorado during his tenure, his instinct is to stay silent and let his performance on the field do the talking. His track record is clear and consistent. Let your performance speak. Don't clutter the narrative with personal commentary. Don't add fuel to the fire. Don't get dragged into social media drama. When other players are feuding online, when other quarterbacks are trading barbs, when other athletes are using their platforms to settle scores, Shedeur opts out. He stays professional. He stays focused. He lets his play on the field be the loudest statement he makes. That's been his approach for years. It's become his identity. Coaches respect it. Teammates respect it. Analysts respect it. Even fans who criticize his performance respect the professionalism he brings to how he handles himself publicly. He's the kind of player who could blow up on social media if he wanted to. He's got the platform. He's got the followers. He's got reasons to be frustrated, but he chooses not to. He chooses composure, which is precisely why it registered so powerfully when he chose to break from that pattern. When Shedeur decided to address Jordan Seaton directly and publicly, people paid attention. The internet paid attention, because everyone who follows college football knew that this wasn't casual. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't Shedeur being petty or dramatic. This was Shedeur making a deliberate decision that something was important enough to break his silence. If Shedeur Sanders is speaking up, the logic goes, this must matter. This must be serious. This must be something he felt needed to be corrected. And that framing, the understanding that Shedeur only speaks when it truly matters, gave his response credibility before he even said a word. But here's what made it even more powerful. Shedeur did not make an emotional rant. He didn't go on a social media tirade. He didn't attack Seaton personally. He didn't question his character or his motivations. He didn't get defensive. He didn't sound angry. He made his statement factual, measured, and focused on one thing, the verifiable truth. Shedeur referenced the physical transformation directly. He pointed to the documented evidence, the photos, the video, the visible proof that Seaton's body had changed significantly while at Colorado. He acknowledged the investment that Colorado's coaching staff had made in Seaton's development. He made clear, with specificity and with evidence, that the narrative Seaton was pushing simply did not align with reality. The core of Shedeur's message was direct and irrefutable. The program gave Seaton everything he needed to develop, and pretending that didn't happen is dishonest. That's not an opinion. That's not a debatable take. That's a statement backed by documented facts that Seaton himself can't deny without looking absurd. What made the call-out resonate so widely wasn't just that it was factually grounded, though it absolutely was. It was that Shedeur framed it around something deeper than statistics and evidence. He spoke to loyalty. He spoke to the reality that the people who invested time and resources into Seaton's growth, the coaches, the strength staff, the program, deserved acknowledgement, not erasure. When you take someone's work, when you benefit from someone's investment in your development, you don't then turn around and suggest they failed you. That's not just factually wrong. That's disloyal. That's ungrateful. That's dishonest. And Shedeur articulated that in a way that made it about more than just facilities or numbers. He made it about character. He made it about what it means to acknowledge the people who helped build you. He made it about the kind of person you are when you're in a position to be honest or dishonest, and you choose dishonesty because it makes you look better in your new situation. That perspective, that broader understanding of what Seaton's claims represented beyond just factual inaccuracy, is what gave Shedeur's response its power. It wasn't just, "You're wrong about the facilities." It was, "You're being dishonest about the people who developed you, and that says something about your character." And when a player known for his composure and professionalism decides that something is worth addressing with that level of seriousness, people listen. The internet listened. Recruits listened. Current Colorado players listened. Analysts listened. NFL scouts who are constantly evaluating character and behavior patterns listened. Shedeur broke his silence because he felt something needed to be corrected. And the way he corrected it, with facts, with documentation, with an appeal to loyalty and honesty, made his response something that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. It became a defining moment, not just in this particular narrative, but in how people understood Shedeur Sanders as a leader. Let's zoom in on what Shedeur actually said, because the specifics of his message are important. This wasn't a vague response. This wasn't a general defense of the program. This was targeted, specific, and grounded in documentation that everyone can verify. Shedeur referenced Seaton's physical transformation directly and explicitly. He brought up the numbers. He talked about how Seaton arrived at Colorado weighing around 330 pounds and left as a 305-pound lineman. He made the physical change impossible to ignore or minimize. By putting that number comparison front and center, Shedeur made it clear that this wasn't some minor detail. This was substantial evidence of what Colorado's program had accomplished. Then he pointed to the documented evidence. He referenced the photos. He referenced the video footage. He made clear that anyone who wanted to verify what he was saying could do so themselves. He wasn't asking people to take his word for it. He was directing them toward evidence they could look at independently. That's a powerful rhetorical move because it removes any possibility of dismissing his claims as just, he said. The evidence is out there. It's public. It's verifiable. Shedeur also explicitly acknowledged the investment that Colorado's coaching staff had made in Seaton's development. This is a crucial part of his response because it does something important. It validates the work that was actually done. It says, yes, Colorado's strength and conditioning staff put time and effort into your development. Yes, Colorado's resources were used to transform your body. Yes, that investment was real and significant. By acknowledging that investment, Shedeur wasn't being generous to Colorado. He was being accurate. He was pointing to a factual reality that Seaton was trying to erase. Colorado's coaching staff invested in Seaton's development. That's not debatable. That's not opinion. That's documented fact. And then Shedeur made clear, with specificity and evidence, that the narrative Seaton was pushing simply did not align with reality. This is the money quote moment of the response. He's not saying, I disagree with your take. He's saying, your narrative doesn't match what actually happened. He's drawing a bright line between Seaton's claims and the documented facts. The core of Shedeur's message, the thing he kept coming back to, was direct. The program gave you what you needed to develop, and pretending it didn't is dishonest. That's a powerful statement because it's not attacking Seaton as a person. It's attacking the dishonesty of his narrative. It's saying, I can prove you're wrong about this specific thing, and I'm going to do it with documentation. But here's where Shedeur elevated his response beyond just defending the program with facts. He spoke to something deeper. He talked about loyalty. He made the point that the people who invested in Seaton's development, the coaches, the strength staff, the program as a whole, deserved acknowledgement and honesty, not erasure and false narratives. That's a powerful appeal because it reframes the entire situation. It's no longer just, Seaton said something about facilities that turned out to be false. Now it's Seaton is being disloyal to the people who invested in him. That's a character judgment, not just a factual correction. Shedeur was essentially saying, you can transfer wherever you want. You can choose any program, that's your right. But once you're at your new program, don't lie about where you came from. Don't erase the people who helped build you. Don't pretend the foundation that was laid for you wasn't real or wasn't valuable. The people who invested in your development deserve better than that. That message resonated because it touched something real. In an era where transfers are constant and players move around frequently, there's something uncomfortable about players publicly criticizing their former programs and coaches. There's something that doesn't sit right about benefiting from a program's resources and then turning around to suggest those resources were inadequate. Shedeur articulated that discomfort. He gave voice to the perspective that loyalty and honesty matter, even in a transactional world. He made the case that you can make your own choices about where to play, but you can't rewrite history about where you came from. And he did all of this without being mean or personal. He didn't attack Seaton's character directly. He didn't question his intelligence. He didn't make this about anything other than the verifiable facts and the principle of honest acknowledgement. That restraint was actually part of what made the response so effective. Shedeur could have gotten personal. He could have questioned Seaton's motivations or integrity. But he didn't. He stayed focused on the facts, the documentation, and the principle of loyalty. That's not easy to do when you're publicly calling someone out. But that's what Shedeur did. His message, stripped down to its essence, was, here's what happened. Here's the evidence. Here's why claiming otherwise is dishonest. And that simple, factual, respectful approach was somehow more devastating than any personal attack could have been. While Shedeur was handling the public-facing response to Seaton's false claims, Coach Prime was delivering a message to his current roster that deserves equal attention. Because the timing of these two communications wasn't coincidental. They were part of the same statement about culture. Prime called his players together and delivered a message with clarity and without ambiguity. He told them, do not talk about your former schools. Do not talk about your former coaches. Do not talk about your former programs. That was the direct instruction. But then he went further. He explained why that instruction mattered. Prime used a specific analogy to make the point land, and it's worth understanding because it reveals how he thinks about culture and character. He said that talking about where you used to be when you're somewhere new is like talking about your ex when you're in a better relationship. It's unnecessary. It reflects poorly on you. It signals that you haven't fully committed to where you're going. That's a powerful analogy because it reframes the entire conversation. It's not about don't badmouth Colorado. It's about a fundamental approach to how you carry yourself as a person. When you move on to something new, you move on mentally and emotionally. You don't keep looking backward. You don't keep bringing up the past. You don't keep comparing your old situation to your new situation. Because doing all of that signals that you're not fully present where you are. Prime's message wasn't just about optics or managing public perception, though it certainly accomplishes both of those things. His message was about the mentality that he's always tried to build into the players who come through his program. The idea that real competitors are focused on what's ahead of them, not on settling scores with what's behind them. Think about that distinction for a moment. There's a huge difference between a player who transfers and thinks, I'm excited about what's ahead of me, and a player who transfers and thinks, let me tell everyone why my old program failed me. The first player is looking forward. The second player is looking backward. The first player has mentally moved on. The second player is still engaged with what they left behind. Prime's philosophy is that you want competitors who are mentally and emotionally invested in the future, not trapped in the past. Because a player who's spending mental energy on defending their transfer decision or explaining why they left their old program is not fully focused on the work in front of them. They're not fully present. They're divided. So when Prime told his players, don't talk about your former schools, he wasn't being petty. He wasn't trying to protect Colorado's reputation. He was teaching them something about how to be a competitor. He was telling them, if you're here, be here. If you're somewhere else, be there. Don't straddle both worlds. Don't drag your past into your present. That's coaching. That's leadership. That's establishing a culture standard about how players conduct themselves. The timing of Prime's message arriving simultaneously with Shedeur's public response created a coordinated statement about what Colorado's culture is and what it is not. Current players were being shown in real time the right way to handle a difficult situation. They were seeing their quarterback, their leader, respond to false claims with facts, documentation, and a commitment to loyalty. They weren't seeing drama. They weren't seeing personal attacks. They were seeing how a leader conducts himself under pressure. Meanwhile, former players like Seaton who had left and chosen to publicly criticize the program, were providing the contrast. They were demonstrating what Colorado's culture is not. It's not about erasing your past. It's not about making false claims to cover for the real reasons you left. It's not about disrespecting the people who invested in you. And the audience watching from the outside, recruits, other coaches, analysts, fans, NFL evaluators, could see the difference clearly. They could see Colorado's culture in action. They could see how the program's leadership responded when challenged. They could see what the program valued and what it didn't tolerate. That's incredibly powerful messaging. It's not a press release. It's not a statement from an administrator. It's the quarterback and the head coach, in real time, demonstrating exactly what kind of culture exists at Colorado. Shedeur defended Colorado with facts and loyalty. Prime reinforced to his team that this is the standard they should all be operating at. Together, they sent a message that was heard far beyond just the college football community. They showed what leadership actually looks like when things get difficult. They showed what you do when someone spreads false information about your program. You don't ignore it. You don't get defensive. You respond with facts, with documentation, with professionalism, and with a commitment to truth. And you use it as a teaching moment for your current team about what the culture actually is. Now, here's where we need to separate what's actually true from what's being used as a cover story. Because there is a straightforward explanation for why many of these transfers are happening, and it has very little to do with facilities or coaching quality. NIL, name, image, and likeness compensation, has fundamentally restructured how players make decisions about where they play college football. This isn't speculation. This isn't opinion. This is documented reality. The transfer portal exploded as an option for players largely because of NIL. Because suddenly, players could benefit financially from moving to programs with larger, more established NIL collectives. Programs like Clemson and Tennessee have larger, more established NIL collectives with deeper financial resources than Colorado currently has. That's just a fact. Clemson has been investing in building their NIL infrastructure for years. Tennessee has made significant financial commitments to their NIL collective. These programs have longer track records of sending players to the NFL, which increases a player's projected market value and makes them more attractive to corporate sponsors and NIL deals. When Jordan Seaton received a significantly larger financial offer from Clemson's NIL collective, choosing to accept that offer was a rational business decision. From a financial perspective, it makes perfect sense. Why would a player turn down more money to stay somewhere with fewer financial opportunities? The answer is, they shouldn't. They shouldn't be expected to leave money on the table for loyalty. Nobody in a fair analysis is arguing that players should not prioritize their financial futures. That would be unreasonable. These are young men who deserve to make the best financial decisions for themselves and their families. The NIL era has changed the rules of college football, and players are simply playing by those rules. That's not wrong. That's smart. But here's the critical distinction. The transfer being rational is not the same thing as the narrative being honest. The problem is not the transfer. The problem is the dishonest narrative that follows. If Jordan Seaton sat down at Clemson and said, "I got a better financial package. Clemson offered me more money through their NIL collective, and that's why I transferred," that would be an honest and entirely defensible reason. Nobody would criticize him for that. That's just business. That's a player maximizing his own financial opportunities. But that's not what he said. Instead, he suggested that Colorado's development infrastructure was the issue. He said the facilities weren't elite. He said the strength and conditioning program wasn't adequate. He positioned his transfer as a football decision based on his developmental needs, when the reality is likely that it was a financial decision based on NIL opportunities. And that's where the dishonesty comes in. That's where the false narrative becomes a problem. Clemson and Tennessee do have advantages over Colorado right now in terms of established resources, institutional wealth, and depth of an NFL pipeline. That's a factual reality. Colorado is building those things, but they're not there yet. The program is in development mode. Coach Prime hasn't been there forever. The infrastructure is being built, but having more resources does not automatically make the competing narrative true. It doesn't mean Colorado failed to develop Seaton. It doesn't mean the facilities are inadequate. It doesn't mean the strength and conditioning staff didn't do their job. What it means is that Clemson has more money. That's it. Colorado is a program in active development, and Coach Prime has never pretended otherwise. He's transparent about the fact that they're building something. They're not trying to hide that they're the newer, less established program. What is not acceptable is using that developmental gap as cover for a misleading story about player development when the real motivation was financial. If players want to leave Colorado for more money, that's fine. Do it. Take the nil deal. Maximize your opportunity. But don't claim it's because you weren't being developed properly when the documented evidence of your development is right there on your body. That's where the dishonesty becomes the issue. That's where Shedeur's response becomes necessary and justified. There's a difference between "I'm transferring for better financial opportunities" and "Colorado's development infrastructure failed me." The first is honest business. The second is false narrative. And the second becomes a problem because it damages a program's reputation in recruiting, it disrespects the people who invested in the players' development, and it obscures the real reasons why so many players are leaving. If we're honest about the nil era, we acknowledge that money is driving a lot of these transfers. That's not necessarily bad. It's just reality. Programs with more financial resources will attract more players. Programs with less financial resources will lose more players. That's how it works, but we can acknowledge that reality without letting players get away with false narratives about why they're leaving. We can say, "You transferred for better financial opportunities, and that's your right," and simultaneously say, "But don't lie about the program's development infrastructure to justify that decision." That's what Shedeur was articulating. That's what his response was about. Not Seaton shouldn't have left. But if you're going to leave, be honest about why. Don't use false claims about facilities and coaching as cover for financial decisions. Here's something that makes this entire situation even more interesting, and it's something that most people didn't know when the criticism started flowing. Coach Prime had already identified many of the problems that transferring players were publicly complaining about, and he had already started fixing them. After a difficult 2024 season, Coach Prime made significant structural changes to the program. These weren't reactive changes. These weren't changes made in response to criticism from departing players. These were changes that demonstrated exactly how real leadership responds to adversity. When things didn't go the way Prime wanted, he didn't make excuses. He didn't blame the portal. He didn't blame facilities. He looked inward and made changes. The coaching staff underwent a complete overhaul. This wasn't a tweaking at the margins. This was a comprehensive restructuring. Prime brought in new coordinators on both sides of the ball. He actively recruited coaches with NFL-level experience and credentials. These weren't guys trying to build their resumes. These were accomplished coaches coming into Colorado to help accelerate the program's development. Warren Sapp, who had been part of the previous structure, moved on. There were other changes at the coaching level as well. Prime was essentially saying, with action, "Here's what I think needed to change. Here's what I'm doing about it. Here's how we're going to be better." Now, here's the notable irony in all of this. The players who transferred and made public claims about coaching being a central problem in their decisions were making those claims about a coaching staff that Coach Prime had already identified as needing change. Prime had already begun replacing them. Prime had already diagnosed the problem. The very coaching infrastructure that players like Seaton were criticizing publicly was a problem that the program had already privately identified and was actively correcting before their criticisms became public. That's not a coincidence. It's what a program run by a decisive, self-aware head coach actually looks like. Think about the timeline here. Prime makes coaching changes. Then players transfer and go on camera to complain about coaching. But those coaching changes had already happened or were already in motion. So the criticism that transferring players were publicly leveling was directed at something that was already being fixed internally. That matters because it shows the difference between a program that's reactive and a program that's proactive. Colorado wasn't reacting to external criticism. Colorado was leading. Colorado was evaluating its own situation, making tough calls about what needed to change and executing those changes. That's not the behavior of a program in crisis. That's the behavior of a program with confidence and direction. But here's the thing. Prime couldn't publicly announce all of these changes while players were still in the transfer portal process. It would have looked like he was making excuses. It would have looked like he was defensive. So he just made the changes and kept moving forward. He didn't need to broadcast what he was doing. He needed to do it. The irony is that by the time players were publicly criticizing the coaching infrastructure, that infrastructure was already being rebuilt. So their criticisms, which seemed damaging at the moment, were actually being directed at something that was actively being improved by the time those criticisms went public. That's strategic thinking. That's leadership. That's understanding that you don't need to defend yourself against criticism if you're already fixing the things being criticized. The work speaks for itself. Colorado continued to attract elite recruiting talent through all of this transfer chaos. Top-tier players are still choosing to commit to the Buffalo under Coach Prime's leadership. That's the real test of whether a program is in crisis. If your recruiting stays strong, you're not in crisis. You might be going through a rough period. You might be making changes, but you're not in crisis. Programs that are genuinely collapsing do not maintain that level of recruiting success. When players in the portal are hearing that a program is dysfunctional, when the narrative becomes, this program is broken, recruiting suffers, top players stop wanting to go there. But Colorado kept recruiting well. Colorado kept getting commitments from players who had options elsewhere. The transfer drama, if anything, intensified the us against the world mentality that Prime has always used as a motivational force. And that mentality, historically, produces results. It's not just motivation for the sake of it. It actually works. Players who feel like their program is under attack, who feel like they're fighting against external criticism, who feel like they have something to prove, those players often play at a higher level. So instead of the transfer drama and the criticism from departing players destabilizing Colorado, it actually had the opposite effect. It created a rallying point. It created a clear narrative. We're building something, we're making changes, we're getting better, and everyone who doubts us can watch what we accomplish. That's the kind of pressure and adversity that builds championship cultures. That's the kind of situation that develops leadership. That's how you turn a rough year into a foundation for something bigger. Prime didn't need to fire back at every departing player. He didn't need to defend himself constantly. He just needed to do the work. He needed to make the changes. He needed to keep recruiting. He needed to keep his current team focused and motivated. And that's exactly what he did. One of the most powerful indicators of whether a college football program is actually in crisis is not what players who are leaving say about it. It's whether elite players who have options elsewhere are still choosing to commit to it. Colorado continued to attract elite recruiting talent through all of the transfer portal drama in 2024 and into the offseason. This isn't marginal recruiting success. This is top-tier talent actively choosing to commit to the Buffaloes despite the public criticism from departing players. Think about what that means. If the narrative about Colorado was as damaging as it seemed, if facilities really weren't adequate, if coaching was really subpar, if the development infrastructure was really broken, then why would elite players still want to go there? The answer is they wouldn't. Recruiting would collapse. Top players who have multiple offers would choose programs they believed were better. But that's not what happened. Instead, Colorado maintained its ability to land elite commits. Top-tier players looked at all the available information, the criticism from departing players, the reports about the program, the entire narrative that had built up, and still decided that Colorado was the right choice. That's powerful validation that the negative narrative wasn't convincing to the people making the actual decision. Elite players and their families do their homework. They talk to people in the industry. They look at the trajectory of the program. They evaluate the coaching staff. They assess the facilities. They look at where players end up in the NFL. If Colorado was genuinely as broken as some of the criticism suggested, it would show up in recruiting. Players would go elsewhere. The fact that recruiting stayed strong is evidence that the negative narrative didn't pass the smell test. It didn't survive scrutiny. When elite players and their families actually evaluated Colorado as a destination, they apparently found it attractive enough to commit to, despite all the noise coming from departing players. That's not something that's often discussed when analyzing the transfer portal drama, but it's actually one of the most telling pieces of evidence that Colorado's situation was being overblown. Programs that are genuinely collapsing show clear signs in recruiting. You see programs that can't land top-tier recruits anymore. You see families choosing other programs. You see recruiting classes drop significantly in rankings. You see the quality of incoming talent deteriorate. That's what collapse looks like. Colorado didn't experience that. Colorado's recruiting remained competitive. Colorado kept getting commitments from players who had options elsewhere. That's the real evidence that the program's situation was much more stable than the transfer portal drama suggested. The transfer drama, if anything, intensified the us against the world mentality that Coach Prime has built into his program's identity. And that mentality, that understanding that the program is under scrutiny, that people are watching, that there's external pressure, has historically produced results at Colorado. When you have a roster that feels like they're fighting against doubters, when you have players who understand that their program is being criticized externally, when you have a coach who can harness that pressure and turn it into motivation, that often translates into wins. That often translates into growth. It's not universal. Teams can't just rely on adversity as motivation and expect to win. You need to do the actual work. You need to improve the team. You need to execute the game plan. But the psychological element of playing with a chip on your shoulder, of proving people wrong, of demonstrating that the narrative they're hearing isn't accurate, that's a real advantage. Colorado had that advantage heading into the next period of their rebuild. They had external pressure. They had criticism. They had a clear sense that people doubted them. And they had players and a coach who could turn that into fuel. That's actually a position of strength, not weakness. It's much better to be a program that's been criticized, but is actually building something real, as demonstrated by continued recruiting success, than to be a program that's basking in media praise, but actually collapsing from within. Colorado clearly understood this. Coach Prime clearly understood this. The players who chose to commit to Colorado clearly understood this. They looked at the external narrative, they looked at what the program was actually doing internally, and they made a choice to believe in the latter over the former. And honestly, based on the facts, the coaching changes, the infrastructure investments, the recruiting success, the maintained focus from leadership, that was probably the right choice. Shedeur Sanders is not just a quarterback at the University of Colorado. He has become the defining figure of this program's identity in its current era. Everything he does carries weight. Everything he says gets analyzed. Every public decision he makes contributes to a broader narrative about who he is and what Colorado stands for. That's not a burden he asked for. That's not something he can avoid. It's the reality of being Coach Prime's son, being the quarterback of a major college football program, and being part of the rebuild of Colorado football. When you're in that position, your actions have implications that go far beyond just what happens on Saturday. Every public decision he makes, every time he chooses to speak or to stay silent, every way he handles the pressure and scrutiny that comes with being in the national spotlight, all of it contributes to the legacy he's building. That's true during his college years, and it will be true for the rest of his career. His decision to publicly defend Colorado and challenge Jordan Seaton's false narrative was not impulsive. It was not something that just came out of nowhere. It was deliberate. It reflected an understanding that leadership sometimes requires standing up in uncomfortable moments rather than waiting for the storm to pass. Leadership requires speaking up when the truth is being distorted, even if staying silent would be easier. That's the kind of decision that gets remembered. That's the kind of moment that shapes how people understand who a player is and what he stands for. For current players at Colorado watching this situation unfold, the message was unmistakable. This is a program where leadership means something. This is a program where standing up for your teammates and your program matters. This is a program where the culture is worth defending. This is a program where the people who built something together are expected to protect what they built. For incoming recruits watching this situation unfold, the message was equally clear. This is a program with a quarterback who will stand up for what's right. This is a program with a head coach who sets standards and enforces them. This is a program that values loyalty and professionalism. For everyone outside the Colorado program, NFL scouts, analysts, media, the message was about character and how Shedeur handles adversity and pressure. When Shedeur eventually makes the transition to the NFL, and based on his performance profile and his trajectory, that transition is a matter of when, not if, he will leave Colorado as a player who stood for something beyond personal statistics. He will leave as someone who demonstrated that character and performance can coexist at the highest level. That reputation will follow him. It will precede him. Every locker room he enters, every coach he plays for, every team he's part of will know that this is a player who values loyalty and honesty and is willing to stand up for what he believes in. NFL front offices and scouts evaluate far more than on-field performance when they are building their rosters. They evaluate behavioral patterns. They evaluate how a player conducts himself in the community. They evaluate how a player handles pressure and criticism. They evaluate whether a player demonstrates loyalty and professionalism. This moment, Shedeur's response to Seaton, is exactly the kind of moment that gets discussed in scouting meetings. This is the kind of decision that makes it into evaluations. This is the kind of character signal that matters at the professional level. Putting bitterness and grievances on public display, especially when those grievances are factually questionable, is the kind of character signal that gets noted in negative ways in scouting reports. Teams notice when players prioritize their ego over truth. Teams notice when players can't move on from former programs. Teams notice when players are willing to be dishonest if it makes them look better. Conversely, teams take notice when a player demonstrates loyalty to his program, when he responds to false narratives with calm facts, when he prioritizes truth over personal comfort. Shedeur's response to Seaton, documented, fact-based, focused on loyalty rather than personal attacks, only strengthens the profile he has already been building as a leader. This is the kind of moment that scouts will point to when discussing Shedeur's intangible qualities. This is the kind of decision that supports the narrative that he's a player who thinks about things bigger than himself. In a college football landscape that increasingly functions as a professional business environment, reputation is not just a soft concept or something that sounds good in interviews. Reputation is a career asset. It's something that impacts where you're drafted. It's something that impacts the teams who want to invest in you. It's something that impacts the culture you bring to a locker room. Players who exit difficult situations with class and honesty build careers that are sustainable. They build respect. They build trust. They build networks of people who want to work with them because they know what they're getting. Players who choose to rewrite history for short-term attention, who prioritize their image over truth, who are willing to throw people under the bus on their way out, those players often find that their choices follow them further than they intended. Those choices show up in scouting reports. Those choices influence how teams evaluate them. Shedeur is building a very different kind of reputation. He's building the kind of reputation that opens doors in professional football. He's building the kind of reputation that makes coaches and front offices confident that he'll be a stabilizing presence in their organization. Here's something that doesn't get enough attention when people discuss these kinds of moments in college football. NFL scouts and front offices are absolutely watching this drama. They're not just looking at what happened on the field. They're evaluating every public decision a player makes. They're building psychological profiles. They're assessing character. When Jordan Seaton sits down at Clemson and makes claims about Colorado's developmental infrastructure that are contradicted by his own physical transformation, NFL evaluators are taking note of that. They're making mental notes about his willingness to make false public statements. They're assessing whether he's the kind of player who prioritizes the truth or who prioritizes making himself look good. And when Shedeur Sanders responds with documented facts, calm delivery, and a clear defense of the program that built him, NFL evaluators are taking note of that too. They're seeing a player who thinks before he speaks. They're seeing a player who backs up his claims with evidence. They're seeing a player who demonstrates loyalty and professionalism under pressure. This isn't speculation. This is how professional sports actually work. Character evaluation is a core part of how teams build rosters. An NFL front office will spend more time analyzing interviews and behavioral patterns of high draft pick prospects than the average fan spends analyzing their entire weekend worth of games. Teams want to know, how does this player handle adversity? How does he respond when he's criticized? Does he take responsibility or does he make excuses? Is he willing to throw teammates under the bus if it helps his image? Does he demonstrate loyalty to the people who invest in him? Can he be trusted? Those questions get answered through moments like this. When a player is put in a situation where he can take the easy path or the right path, and he chooses the right path, that's a character data point that gets recorded. Shedeur choosing to respond to Seaton's false claims with documented facts rather than ignoring it or responding emotionally. That's a character data point. That signals to professional evaluators that this is someone who values truth and is willing to stand up for it. Conversely, Seaton's willingness to make misleading public statements about a program that demonstrably invested in his development, that's also a character data point. That signals to professional evaluators that this is someone who will prioritize his own image over accuracy when given the opportunity. Now, does this one incident completely define either player in the eyes of NFL scouts? No, there's much more that goes into evaluation than a single public moment, but it contributes to a narrative. It adds to a profile. It becomes part of how evaluators understand who each player is. And when you're evaluating young men who will be representing your franchise, who will be in your locker room, who will be influencing your team's culture, these kinds of character indicators matter. They matter a lot. The professional game is filled with examples of high talent, high potential players whose careers derailed not because of on-field performance, but because of character issues. Players who couldn't be trusted. Players who were divisive in locker rooms. Players who had loyalty issues or integrity issues or professionalism issues. Conversely, the professional game is filled with examples of players of moderate talent who had incredibly successful careers because of their character, their professionalism, their leadership, their integrity. Shedeur is building the kind of character profile that supports long-term professional success. Seaton is building the kind of character profile that raises questions about trustworthiness and professionalism. That might seem harsh to judge based on one public moment, but that's the reality of professional sports evaluation. Teams are constantly assessing who players are as people, not just as athletes. And this moment, how each player handled a situation involving truth and loyalty, is exactly the kind of thing that matters in that assessment. The NFL is watching how Shedeur handles the challenges at Colorado. The NFL is watching how he manages pressure. The NFL is watching how he conducts himself publicly. The NFL is watching how he responds to his teammates and to his program. And moments like this, where he stands up for what's right even though it would be easier to stay silent, that's the kind of moment that builds the kind of profile that NFL teams want. When Shedeur eventually enters the NFL, this moment will be part of his resume. Not his statistics resume, his character resume. And that character resume is going to open doors that pure statistics alone wouldn't open. Here's the most important question that this entire situation raises, and it's a question that applies far beyond just college football. Who are you when things get difficult and you have nothing left to lose by being dishonest? That's the question the players who transferred from Colorado and chose to speak negatively about the program answered through their behavior. When they were in a position where they could have been honest about why they left, whether it was nil, facilities, coaching, or anything else, they instead chose to construct narratives that made themselves look better or their decisions look more justified. They had already committed to their new programs. They had already accepted their new nil deals. They had already moved on. There was nothing to gain by being honest about their transfer motivations, but there was something to protect, their image. So they chose the narrative that made their decision look like it was forced upon them by Colorado's inadequacies rather than pulled by Clemson's and Tennessee's superior financial packages. That's the kind of choice that says something about who someone is. It says something about whether character and integrity matter to them when there's no practical benefit to having them. Conversely, Shedeur Sanders and Coach Prime answered that same question from the other side. They defended the truth without making it dramatic. They addressed the dishonesty without losing composure. They sent a clear signal to everyone watching, recruits, current players, NFL evaluators, and the broader college football world, about what the Colorado program stands for and how it conducts itself under pressure. They could have stayed silent. Silence would have been easier. Silence would have avoided any potential blowback. Staying silent is what Shedeur does most of the time, but they made a deliberate choice to speak up. They made a deliberate choice to defend truth. They made a deliberate choice to hold people accountable for dishonesty. That choice says something about their character. It says something about what they value. It says something about what kind of culture they're trying to build. The next several seasons at Colorado will serve as the most direct response to everything being said in press rooms and on social media right now. Every criticism that was leveled, every false claim that was made, Every suggestion that Colorado's program was inadequate or underdeveloped will be tested against reality in the form of wins, losses, recruiting success, and player development. Prime and Shedeur aren't wasting energy trying to convince people through more words. They're going to let their work speak for itself. They're going to build a program that is so clearly successful, so clearly well coached, so clearly focused on player development that all the criticism becomes irrelevant. That's confidence. That's understanding that the best response to criticism isn't arguments. It's accomplishment. It's results. Prime and Shedeur are not spending their nights thinking about Jordan Seaton or London Merritt or any of the other players who transferred and spoke negatively about the program. They're not going to obsess over the false narratives that were constructed. They're not going to keep fighting in the court of public opinion. Instead, they're going to build the answer. They're going to develop players. They're going to win games. They're going to take Colorado from being a program in the midst of a difficult transition to being a program that's clearly on an upward trajectory. They're going to prove, through action, that the program's foundation is solid and that the negative narrative was always unfounded. That's the longer game. That's what real leadership looks like. It's not reacting to every criticism. It's not getting dragged into every argument. It's not spending energy defending your reputation against every attack. It's doing the work. It's building the program. It's letting the results speak for themselves. Because in the end, results are what matter. Results are what get remembered. The specific arguments about facilities and coaching and nil packages, those will all fade away. What will remain is whether Colorado built a successful program, whether the team is winning, whether players are being developed properly, whether recruits are choosing to come there. Those are the things that actually matter. Those are the things that define a program's culture and success over time. Prime and Shedeur understand that. They understand that the best response to the noise is excellence. The best response to the criticism is results. The best response to the false narrative is building something so clearly successful that the narrative becomes irrelevant. And that's exactly what they're going to do. That's the message they're sending through their actions right now. That's the statement they're making that goes far deeper than any public response to Seaton could ever go. This moment, Shedeur Sanders calling out Jordan Seaton, Coach Prime reinforcing his culture standards to his team, Colorado continuing to recruit elite talent despite the transfer portal chaos. This moment reveals exactly what the Colorado football program is and who its leadership is. It's a program that doesn't panic when challenged. It's a program that responds to false narratives with documented facts. It's a program that values loyalty and professionalism. It's a program that understands that character matters, that integrity matters, and that standing up for what's right is more important than staying silent for comfort. The players who transferred and spoke negatively about Colorado answered one critical question through their behavior. Who are you when things get difficult? The Colorado leadership answered the same question in a very different way. They demonstrated that when pressure comes, you respond with professionalism, with facts, and with commitment to your program. The next several seasons will tell the real story, not the transfer portal drama, not the criticism from departing players, not the noise and controversy. The next seasons will reveal what Colorado actually built. And based on everything happening right now, the coaching changes, the recruiting success, the culture being reinforced, that story looks like it's going to be about a program that responded to adversity by getting stronger, more focused, and more united. That's not just good for Colorado. That's actually the blueprint for what successful programs do when faced with this kind of moment. They defend their truth, they hold their culture, they keep building, and they let their results do the final talking.